Welcome to the Telltales Podcast, where we discuss cash flow and its pivotal role in investing. I'm Mike Nicoletti.
And I'm Jason Wallace. Along with our co-host Hunt Lawrence, aka Mr. Cash Flow, we're here to explore how cash flow drives the economy and investment performance.
And don't forget to join our email list at telltales.us to get the cash flow memo. It's about 20 pages covering 80 companies, U.S. government's finances, and the energy sector.
It's like having a masterclass on investing in your inbox every week.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Not too much comment on Exhibit C. As I mentioned last Wednesday, when OPEC Plus had a meeting 3 weeks ago on a Sunday, and they said that the voluntary cuts, mostly from Saudi Arabia, some from UAE, they'd start to reverse in the fall. The price of oil in the next 3 or 4 days came down by $6 from roughly 80 WTI down to 74. It's worked its way back to 80. So the various explanations for that. Part of it is that risk premium stopped shrinking. Doesn't seem to be any solution for Gaza other than a military occupation. And this theory in Israel that the best thing to do with Hezbollah in the north part of the country is to just invade Lebanon and move Hezbollah and their 2,000 rocket launchers back well away from the Israeli border. So if we estimated that the base number is 60 and there's another 20 on top of that, some part of that is Ukraine, some part of that is Gaza, some part of that is the willingness of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and a little bit of Russia to curtail production, we might be back with the news in Israel to a full $20. On natural gas, I was just on with one of my close friends in the business side of the gas business, and despite the heat, gas is not reactive. For example, this morning in Platts, the Citygate price in Chicago is $2.50. Normally with this kind of heat, it'd be in the threes at least. The price of power, which goes up and down with the price of gas, was into the Midwest was around 38. So normally in this kind of heat, you'd expect that to be, in the 50s or 60. The explanation seems to be that there's still a fair amount of gas in storage. Production has been running about 100 Bs a day, down from 104 last November. Part of that was two Marcellus producers, Chesapeake and EQT, each announced they curtailed earlier in this year because of low gas prices, 1 billion a day each. And EQT has said, and I think Chesapeake will follow, that with better gas market conditions as we go into the fall, they're planning to bring that production back. So the estimate here on Exhibit B for this year is 103. When we sit down to redo this page, the 103 will have to be lower. One of the reasons to not lower it is with that curtailment ended at QT and Chesapeake and the Marcellus, we might be back at 103. So it doesn't seem like the right time to say, well, average production is closer to 100 because that's what it is year to date. The other thing that's happening in the gas market is you see that gas supply, if you've got the exhibit in front of you, increased 9 Bs a day from 21 to 23, 5 in the Permian, 4 in the Haynesville, and only 1 the Marcellus. Marcellus has been rather flat, partly because there isn't enough pipeline capacity to get the gas out of the Marcellus. And the Haynesville is definitely down. I mean, it's down from what it was last year, but the Permian seems to be up. And there's a new pipe or a pipe about to go into operation, which takes gas from West Texas down to the Gulf Coast. That is to go into operation in August. That pipe will transport 2 Bs a day. When that And the Waha price, which is the West Texas price, spent the whole month of April in negative territory and still only about 50 cents. So with that big differential, West Texas to the Gulf Coast, that pipe should fill up right away. And so that's another concern. On Exhibit A, we will all, or most of us, will be watching the debate tomorrow night, starting at 9 Eastern. I think we can reliably predict that neither President Biden or ex-President Trump is going to talk about the need for increasing taxes. Just don't think that's the way to run for office. I don't think either one of them is going to talk about the need to get back to pre-COVID spending. I'm always pointing during these Wednesdays to the all other category, which was $900 billion before COVID and is now $1 trillion for. That needs work. Interest, we can't help. Rate of interest went up and the debt went up. So the amount of interest paid by the federal government pre-COVID was $400 billion, and now it's going to be $740 billion for 24. I think it's probably higher. Now there's an article in one of the papers this morning that points out that Social Security and Medicare, if the trust funds get low enough, and they're predicted to get there in 4 or 5 years, you actually have to curtail. It's by legislation that's been passed and survived any kind of legal challenge. You have to start curtailing Social Security payments and Medicare payments. I don't think there's any way that can happen politically. So the next president, whoever it is after November 5th, is going to have to be active on spending. I just personally don't think that the individual income tax is going to do much good. It's amazing. If you look at 24 estimate, less than 500 billion comes from the corporate income tax. But once again, I don't see too much room to increase that. The payroll taxes are $1.6 trillion. Those go up as more people are working at higher wages. But I really don't see how the next president is going to be able to raise much more than $5 billion. 2.5 from individual income taxes, $1.6 trillion from payroll taxes, $0.5 trillion from payroll tax and excise and tariffs and whatnot, about $250 billion. So what do? I mean, the total spending estimated on this sheet for 24 is $6.4 trillion. Now, that would be a deficit for the fiscal year we're in of $1.6 trillion. You see higher numbers like $1.8 trillion or $1.9 trillion, but I think they're including canceling student debt. And as I look at it, because this is supposed to be cash in and cash out, canceling student debt isn't really a cash expense. And recent news articles say that the administration is already losing at the district court level, saying that they don't have the authority to cancel student debt. So if either one of these candidates were better grounded, and I include both of them, not just Trump, they would mention during their hour and a half of Q&A with Jake Tapper and Dana Bash that work needs to be done here. But I think it's a fair estimate, a fair prediction that neither one of them will speak to that. Now we're going to do something different. I rehearsed this with Mike this morning. I'm sure we're going to do healthcare first. Since the last several Wednesdays, we only allocate 5 or 6 minutes or maybe less at the end. So we're going to do healthcare first, and then, as promised a couple of Wednesdays ago, then we're going to do cars. But we're now 10 minutes into the 30 minutes, so the next 10 minutes are entirely going to be on healthcare. I think Mike and I want to turn that over to Jason. And just to lead off, Jason, the ones that you guys have spent the most time on are Vertex and Lantheus. I guess just an update on those two.
Yeah, Vertex actually had some exciting news earlier this week with an early stage phase 1/2 study. So they were studying a stem cell derived treatment for type 1 diabetes. It's islet cells that are insulin producing that can be infused into the patient. So it was an early study, so only 12 patients were given the the proper dose of the drug. But of those 12 patients, 11 of them at the 90-day mark were insulin independent, which is a big deal for a type 1 diabetic. And 3 of those patients went through the study at the year mark, so the full duration of the study. So it's a 1-year study, and all 3 of those remained independent of insulin. So this is a big deal, and especially interesting to my family. And Mike and I were doing some rough numbers on it, and it's a huge market when you consider this is a one-time infusion and potentially curative, but still early stage. Obviously, only 12 people were given it, and it's a phase 1. But that would have a huge impact on our investment if it did reach success following a phase 3 study. Other news is around GLP-1s. Eli Lilly is seeking FDA approval to use the GLP-1 to treat sleep apnea. They have positive study results on that. If they succeed in that FDA approval, I think we'll see a wave of research and potentially approvals where these GLP-1s are going to be used to treat a wide variety of obesity-related diseases. So whether it's sleep apnea or anything else, just potentially just increases the market for these even further. So it's already a huge market, and potentially half the population could be looking at some way to take one of these drugs. And with that said, these drugs are on the FDA shortage list. So when a drug's on the shortage list, it allows compounding pharmacies to make a version of it, essentially, a generic version, if you will. And one of the companies doing that is Hims and Hers. So it's a company we've been following for a little while. They're a telehealth company that potentially is the only one that has kind of succeeded post-COVID world. So they started out providing, and still do provide, a lot of generic drugs. And it's mail order. So you get an online diagnosis, mail order the drug to your house. And they had been growing pretty steadily. But they announced that they're going to start delivering a compounded version of a GLP-1, compounded version of semaglutide. So the stock really rallied on that. I would caution people on that is as soon as this drug comes off the FDA shortage list, that company is not going to be allowed to continue that practice. So we've been looking at it for a while. We haven't got comfortable with Hims and Hers, but when they are no longer able to sell this weight loss drug, maybe that'll be a buying opportunity.
Hey, Jason, just if I can interrupt, is insulin a medicine for Vertex? Was that part of their acquisition, or is that something they've been bringing along organically?
Yeah, it was kind of part of 2 acquisitions, really. So they acquired that. They acquired a company developing that drug that this one's ultimately the study for in 2022. And then 3 years before that, they also acquired a company developing a stem cell derived type 1 diabetes treatment. And I think the main IP takeaway from that first acquisition was really an encapsulation device that they can encapsulate the stem cell and implant it into the body without causing an immune reaction. So in this first study that they released the results on this past week, the patients had to take an immunosuppressant so that the body doesn't reject these cells that are implanted in the pancreas. Future versions of this same treatment, they're going to encapsulate that same cell in this, I don't even know what to call it, device, and be able to implant it in the body directly without having to suppress the immune system. So that'll be a kind of a big deal. Less, hopefully if the study proves out, less chance your body rejects the treatment.
Really interesting. Mike's gone back and looked at the history of Vertex, but what enables them to continue to come up with new medicines at a rate that probably maybe doesn't equal what Lilly does, but some much larger pharmaceutical companies don't seem to come up with as many new projects as Vertex does. Are they just better at judging these things, or is it part of their history as a group working together? What's your assessment of Vertex?
Yeah, I'd say they've been working on a lot of these for a number of years, and it's just kind of all starting to bubble to the surface at once. A combination of homegrown research and acquisition. It seems like they have a really good thought process around the types of companies they're going to go after, the therapeutic areas they're going to target. With the type 1 diabetes treatment, they bolted together 2 acquisitions to really come up with this strategy for type 1 diabetes. The gene therapy work that they've done and receiving FDA approval for Casgevy, that was also a number of years of work. And they acquired a company in 2019 that was focused on genetic therapies around muscular dystrophy. And really that research hasn't reached clinical stage yet. So I suspect they were acquiring talent. It wasn't really all that long after CRISPR was invented as a therapy. So there probably wasn't a large pool of talent there. Their strategy, they'll tell you, is that they want to go after definitely severely undertreated diseases in a patient population that doesn't count as a rare disease, but isn't large enough where other players will want to target it. And then their strategy becomes to just dominate the research in that and never slow down in the research. So if you look at what they do in CF, they are constantly beating the high bar that they set for themselves. They plan to do that with kidney disease. They say they're going to do that with their non-opioid treatment as well. And it sure seems like they're lining up this type 1 diabetes work to be the same kind of thing. So this one's in phase 1/2 results. They've already got 2 other subsequent studies following behind it, early stage phase 1s. So the next 2 versions of this same treatment.
Well, and we haven't mentioned their pain medication.
No, yeah. So they're continuing with their phase 3 study, and they're doing rolling submissions with the FDA, and it seems like it's going well. They're also studying it for nerve pain. So a big unmet need there. I think, and I've said it before, I think it has a high chance of success, just because it's going to be the most effective pain treatment that doesn't have addictive properties. And that's really needed in the US, and a lot of parts of the world haven't allowed opioid use. So it will be the most effective pain treatment in those countries.
Mm-hmm. And competitors to non-opioid pain treatment? I mean, there must be other organizations on a worldwide basis that are trying to pursue a similar result.
There are, and I don't have the list in front of me, but they're all for pretty early stage. So they're a number of years out. The main mode of action that Vertex uses wasn't known to be as effective in humans until they studied it. And I don't think it was until that they started producing phase 3 results that showed it was effective that other groups really decided to accelerate into that research. So they're going to have they're going to have a huge lead on the competition. And given Vertex's history and what management says, they're not going to slow down on iterating on their drug, on their drug research in that space either.
Right. And then they have sensational free cash flow. If you look at page 15 and you just cite the last two on the page, BioNTech and Vertex, I mean, BioNTech was behind the Pfizer COVID medication. I mean, really incredible achievement, but look at the difference between their free cash flow. BioNTech has barely any free cash flow, and Vertex has $3 billion. So they're able to do all this activity and pay for it, and still have free cash flow. So it's, from a financial point of view, very impressive performance.
Right, and they're able to fund quite a lot of research, and then additionally, when these reach market, they'll be able to fund commercialization without any, concerns for cash flow. Yeah,
fair point. I mean, the BioNTech R&D budget is $1.8 billion, and Vertex is $3 billion. It's very impressive. Well, now we get the last 5 minutes on cars. I guess we turn to page 1 and look at Tesla. I don't want to prejudge what Mike and Jason are going to tell us about Tesla, but some part of Tesla is the car business and some parts all other. But since Jason took most of the healthcare, Mike, how do you divide up what one's paying per share for Tesla between the car business and the prospects they have for robotaxis and robots and everything else that Tesla is trying to do?
Sure. So the way we would prefer to be able to buy Tesla is to value it at a fair value based on something that's tangible and real today. So the way we'd like to look at it is to say Tesla's producing next year going to do 3.5 million units, or I don't know what their forecast is for next year, but let's assume a certain number of units, assume an average price, and assume an operating margin. The reality is the EV market, and actually the whole automotive market, is under a lot of pressure right now. Higher interest rates are making more expensive cars less affordable, and we've had car prices kind of go through the roof in the last few years. So a lot of people are deciding to delay automotive purchases. At the same time, there are Chinese in other parts of the world, and then Korean here in the U.S. that customers need to compete against, or Tesla needs to compete against. So there's just, in general, more competition there was during COVID. So the reality is you probably have to expect that the automotive business generates a lower operating margin. So that leaves us with, well, how do you justify a $200 per share valuation for Tesla, which maybe is about where it is today, just under. I'll go ahead and cite Morgan Stanley's research on it. They have a price target of $310 per share, and only 105 of that value is attributed to the automotive business. If you want to break up the other things that are interesting at Tesla, again, they're kind of far out there. It's this full self-driving thing, which will enable ultimately Tesla's own version of Uber, right? Essentially a ride-sharing type of application. There's a lot of value, at least within the Morgan Stanley analysis, that's applied to that, over $100 a share. There's the humanoid robot piece. Again, another potentially could be super useful thing that it's kind of like a clinical trial, right? Just like we're thinking through the drug companies, these things are all option values. And what we want to be able to see is the technology on a path towards reality, or is there some hanging thing that won't happen? So you think about self-driving, full self-driving, robo-taxi type situation. We believe the technology is already there, but the hindrance to employ that business model is dependent on regulatory change. And that's challenging. And that is sort of the reason that we don't like to attribute much value to an option like that. And it's the same reason that we don't, when we value something like Vertex, we don't attribute a lot of value to stuff that's in the pipeline. Because for many reasons, when you go through in-human trials, you could have all sorts of problems. So today, the valuation probably carries more value of these things that are not real yet, but a lot of work has gone into de-risking them than one would probably prefer. That said, you certainly wouldn't want to be investing in an automotive company that is not differentiated in any way. I definitely believe that the Chinese will do a very good job of mass producing low-cost EVs. It is right up their alley. It's already happening. So if Tesla is going to be really the Apple of cars, then they have to have a premium product. And that premium product has to have something to keep people interested in the product. So you think about an Apple user. What's the probability that a current Apple user will buy another Apple phone? Very high, probably 90+%. If you ask, and again, I'll cite a recent survey that Morgan Stanley did where they sampled EV owners to see their probability of purchasing another EV. If they were a Tesla owner, the probability of purchasing another EV was, I think it was 86% or something like that. If you just sampled the whole populace of EV owners, it was significantly lower. 46% were considering another EV. So that's the type of differentiation you start to see that's more of an Apple type of scenario. I think it's because people that have Teslas have experienced the autopilot and that sort of technology. Unless that becomes ubiquitous with the others, which there's no indication that we have that would suggest that that's even possible, I think that they'll have the lead in that. But again, there's a regulatory hurdle that could be very challenging to overcome.
Let's just, first of all, see if Jason has anything to add to Mike's comments on Tesla.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. One is if cars, and we've said this in the past, if EVs become, or just cars in general, become a commodity, is having really cheap production from China a bad thing? And we're trying to prevent it today with tariffs and whatnot. I think if cars were commoditized, maybe that's a dystopian future, but I like cars. So, and then the other point is human nature is to overestimate what we can do in 1 year and then greatly underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So I think Elon makes these big predictions about robots and robo-taxis, and we put a lot of value on it today. But then some people take the other side of the argument and say, we won't have robots even in 10 years. So I don't think we're going to have a robot next year, but having these humanoid robots, having seen kind of videos of the in-work stuff, if you look at Boston Dynamics, it's not unreasonable to say in 10 years, there's some service that provides robot helpers. So I'll just keep that in mind. It's probably not as far off as we think.
Yeah. We'll do a big dose of healthcare next week and more on Tesla and cars in general and consumer spending in general. There's a new page 8, Walmart, Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, and CarMax. These are all consumer-facing companies. The first quarter results are included here. It's very slow for consumer-facing companies. We can say that the unemployment rate is still around 4% or less, and jobs are being added and whatnot. But clearly, as Mike pointed out, buying a car is something you can postpone. And in these consumer-facing companies, there's a lot of postponing going on. I think we have to take that into account when we start talking about cars in general. The other thing I'd say about Tesla is that take the Morgan Stanley number. There are 3 billion shares outstanding. $100 would be 300 billion. If we take a reasonable, if you cite across Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, and you say, well, a free cash flow ratio of around 30 times would be about right. On 300 billion, you need 10 billion of free cash flow. And through the first 3 months, the number's 3. Now, Mike, I think that the cars produced last year or for the last 12 months are order of magnitude 2 million cars. So getting 2 to 3 is Herculean. And the point, Jason's point about overestimating what happens in 1 year and underestimating a longer period, 3 million units from Tesla might be, 3 years from now rather than sooner. Well, we promise more on cars and healthcare next week, and we will ignore chips and software. In the meantime, talk next week. Even though it's the day before the 4th of July, we will be on next Wednesday. Take care, everyone. Be well and stay healthy. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.